The antiseptic smell hit my nostrils before I even opened my eyes, making me wince. Beeping monitors provided a steady rhythm, like metronomes counting down seconds I might not have left. My throat felt raw, scraped from the inside, and something sharp pulled at my arm whenever I tried to move. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, squinting as shapes gradually came into focus. Hospital room. The realization washed over me in a cold wave. What happened? My memory felt like shattered glass, fragmented, sharp, dangerous to touch. "She's awake," a woman's voice said somewhere to my right. "Page Dr. Moretti." "Where am I?" My voice sounded foreign, barely a whisper. A nurse with kind eyes and a tight ponytail leaned over me. "You're at Ospedale San Raffaele, Miss Evans. You're in recovery after surgery." Surgery. The word hung in the air like a threat. I tried to sit up, but pain exploded across my abdomen, stealing my breath. "Please don't move," the nurse said, gently pressing me back against the pillows. "You need to stay still. You've lost a lot of blood." Blood. Flashes came back to me then. Screeching tires, breaking glass, the metallic tang of blood filling my mouth. The car accident. I'd been driving home from my late shift at the restaurant, rain slashing against my windshield, when headlights had appeared from nowhere. "How bad?" I managed to ask. The nurse checked my IV, avoiding my gaze. "The doctor will explain everything." That's when I noticed the two men standing by the door. They wore identical black suits, earpieces, and expressionless faces. Their presence seemed as out of place in this sterile environment as a loaded gun at a christening. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. I knew what those men meant. They could only be here for one reason. Alessandro Russo. The name floated through my mind like a prayer or a curse. I wasn't sure which anymore. It had been 6 months since I'd first seen him at Trattoria Belnoti, where I worked as a waitress. 6 months since my life had changed irrevocably. The door opened, and a doctor entered, clipboard in hand, eyes tired but alert. "Miss Evans, I'm Dr. Moretti. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," I said, then almost laughed at the literal truth of it. "A BMW X7, actually," Dr. Moretti said without a hint of humor. "You're very lucky to be alive." Lucky wasn't the word I'd use, especially not if Alessandro knew I was here. The thought made my heart monitor spike, which didn't escape the doctor's notice. "Try to stay calm," he said. "Your injuries were severe: internal bleeding, ruptured spleen, broken ribs. We had to perform emergency surgery, but you're stable now." I swallowed, wincing at the dryness in my throat. "When can I leave?" Dr. Moretti frowned. "Not for at least a week, maybe more. You need time to recover." A week. The panic rose in my chest like floodwater. A week was too long. I needed to disappear before. The atmosphere in the room changed suddenly, like the drop in air pressure before a storm. The two guards at the door straightened, and Dr. Moretti's expression shifted to something between deference and fear. Heavy footsteps approached in the hallway, accompanied by the low murmur of respectful voices. I knew those footsteps. They had followed me in my dreams for months. Alessandro appeared in the doorway, filling it with his presence. 6'2" of controlled fury, dressed in a tailored black suit that did nothing to hide the power beneath. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. The shadow of stubble darkened his jaw, making him look more dangerous than usual. Our eyes met, and despite my condition, I felt that familiar electricity shoot through me. His amber eyes, usually warm when they looked at me, now burned with something darker. Rage, fear, possession, all swirling together in a toxic cocktail. "Out," he said. One word, barely above a whisper, but everyone scrambled to obey. Even Dr. Moretti gave only a cursory 10 minutes, no more, before retreating. The door closed, leaving us alone. Alessandro stood perfectly still, watching me. I'd seen that stillness before, right before he ordered a man's fingers broken for touching my arm at the restaurant. "You ran." His voice was soft, which made it all the more terrifying. "Alessandro, 8 hours," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. 8 hours of my men searching every hospital, every clinic in Milan. 8 hours not knowing if you were alive or dead. He moved to the side of my bed with the predatory grace that had first caught my attention all those months ago. The first time I'd seen him walk into the restaurant, I'd dropped an entire tray of wine glasses. My boss had nearly fired me on the spot until Alessandro had insisted I serve his table personally. I didn't know then that he was the Alessandro Russo, heir to the most powerful criminal organization in northern Italy. I just knew he was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not even sure what I was apologizing for. Running away? Getting caught? Nearly dying? Alessandro sat on the edge of my bed, careful not to jostle me. Up close, I could see the toll the night had taken on him. The shadows under his eyes, the tightness around his mouth. "The police said it was a hit and run," he said, his accent thickening as it always did when he was upset. "They said you were conscious when the ambulance arrived, that you spoke." I closed my eyes, trying to remember. Flashing lights, paramedics, pain like I'd never known, and yes, trying to speak through blood-filled lungs. "They said my name was the last word you spoke before you lost consciousness." Alessandro's hand found mine, his fingers surprisingly gentle as they intertwined with my own. "Why, Isabella? Why my name when you were running from me?" The truth stuck in my throat. How could I explain that even as I fled from him, he was still my first thought in what I believed were my final moments, that despite everything, some part of me still belonged to him? "I wasn't running from you," I lied. His fingers tightened fractionally around mine. "Do not lie to me. Not now. Not after I got that call." Something raw entered his voice. Something I'd never heard from him before. "Do you know what it's like to be told at 2 a.m. that the woman you—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "That you're in surgery, possibly dying, and my name was the last word on your lips." I couldn't meet his gaze. "I was trying to protect you." A sound somewhere between a laugh and a growl escaped him. "Protect me? Me?" His free hand gently tilted my chin up, forcing me to look at him. "I have 200 men who would die at a word from me. I control half of Milan, and you thought you needed to protect me?" "From the truth," I whispered. Something flickered across his face. Uncertainty. Perhaps the first I'd ever seen in him. What truth? I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head over the past week, since I'd discovered my secret. But now, broken and trapped in this hospital bed, the words seemed impossible to form. "Isabella." My name in his mouth was both a caress and a command. "Tell me." I took as deep a breath as my broken ribs would allow. "I'm pregnant." The world seemed to stop. Alessandro went completely still, his face unreadable. For a man who lived his life in constant motion, commanding, deciding, controlling, this utter stillness was terrifying. "You're carrying my child," he finally said. Not a question. I nodded. "I found out last week. And you ran." His voice was dangerously quiet. "You took my child, and ran." "It's not like that," I protested. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do. What to do. His eyes narrowed. "There is nothing to do. You are mine. The child is mine." The possessiveness in his voice sent a shiver down my spine, half fear, half something else I didn't want to name. This was exactly why I'd run. Alessandro Russo didn't share what he considered his. "I can't be part of your world, Alessandro. Your enemies will never touch you," he interrupted, fierce determination hardening his features. "Or our child." He stood suddenly, pulling out his phone and barking orders in rapid Italian. I caught words like security and private floor, and my stomach sank. This was happening too fast. "Alessandro, please," I said when he finished his call. "We need to talk about this." He returned to my bedside, his expression softening marginally. "We will talk, cara mia, about why you thought you could leave me. About how you nearly got yourself and our child killed." His hand moved to hover over my stomach, not quite touching. "But first, we make sure you both are safe." The door opened, and a stream of men entered. More security, a woman who looked like a private nurse, and a distinguished older man who I guessed was another doctor. "I want her moved to the private wing immediately," Alessandro told the new doctor. Full monitoring for both her and the baby. The doctor nodded. Of course, Mr. Russo. We've already prepared the suite. As the room bustled with activity around us, Alessandro leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear. You thought you could escape me, Isabella? His whisper was silk over steel. The moment you walked into my restaurant, you became mine. The child you carry only makes it official. It's not that simple, I whispered back. He straightened, a smile curving his lips that didn't reach his eyes. It is exactly that simple. You tried to leave me once. It won't happen again. As they prepared to move me, I caught sight of Alessandro giving instructions to one of his men, who nodded gravely. I'd seen that look before. Someone was going to pay for my accident. The thought should have horrified me, but a small, dark part of me felt something else. Protection. Possession. Power. This was what I'd run from, not just Alessandro, but who I became when I was with him. The way the darkness in him called to something I'd never known existed in me. As they wheeled me out of the room, Alessandro walked alongside, his hand not leaving mine. Despite everything, my injuries, my fear, my uncertain future, I felt that treacherous sense of safety in his presence. You will never leave me again, Alessandro said, quiet enough that only I could hear. Not a threat, but a promise. I will burn this city to the ground before I let you go, and God help me. Part of me believed him. Part of me wanted him to. The private hospital suite Alessandro had arranged for me was more luxurious than any hotel I'd ever stayed in. Cream-colored walls, plush furniture, and a view overlooking Milan's skyline that would have cost thousands at a high-end hotel. Not that I could appreciate it much from my hospital bed. 3 days had passed since my transfer. 3 days of constant monitoring, hushed medical consultations, and Alessandro's overwhelming presence. He'd barely left my side, conducting his business from a makeshift office in the corner of my room, speaking in rapid Italian on his phone, voice dropping to dangerous whispers whenever something displeased him. You need to eat more, he said now, eyeing the half-finished bowl of soup on my tray. He sat in the chair beside my bed, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. Even in this casual state, power emanated from him like heat from a flame. I'm not hungry, I replied, pushing the tray away. The medication made food taste like cardboard. Alessandro's jaw tightened. The baby needs nourishment. The baby. Every time he mentioned our child, something shifted in his eyes, a possessiveness even deeper than what he felt for me. It terrified and fascinated me in equal measure. The doctor said I'm doing fine, I countered. Both of us are. Fine is not enough. Alessandro pushed the tray back toward me. 3 more bites, at least. I sighed, but picked up the spoon again. This was the new normal. Alessandro micromanaging every aspect of my recovery, from my medication schedule to my meal plans to the room's temperature. Any attempt at independence was met with that dark look that brooked no argument. As I forced down another spoonful of lukewarm soup, my eyes drifted to the 2 guards positioned outside my door, visible through the glass panel. They hadn't moved in hours, like statues in expensive suits. Are they really necessary? I asked, nodding toward the men. Alessandro didn't even look up from the document he was reviewing. Yes. We're in a hospital, Alessandro. A private floor with restricted access. Who could possibly? The driver of the car that hit you is still out there. He cut me off, his accent thickening as it always did when he was angry. Until I know who was behind it, you don't go anywhere without protection. A chill ran through me. You think someone targeted me deliberately? His eyes met mine, and the coldness in them made me shiver. The accident happened 2 hours after you left my house, on a deserted road. The driver didn't stop, didn't call for help. You think this is coincidence? I hadn't considered that possibility. In my mind, it had been just bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. But Alessandro lived in a world where there were no accidents, only calculations. Who would want to hurt me? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. Alessandro set down his papers, giving me his full attention. Someone wanting to hurt me, cara mia, and they nearly succeeded. The intensity in his gaze made me look away. It was too much sometimes, being the focus of a man like him. like staring directly at the sun. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked. He was silent for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he stood, moving to the window with his back to me. Against the backdrop of Milan's skyline, his silhouette looked imposing, shoulders broad beneath his crisp white shirt. "There's been a power struggle within the Calabrian families," he said eventually. "Territories in dispute, business arrangements questioned." I knew enough about Alessandro's world to understand what business arrangements meant. Though he owned legitimate enterprises, restaurants, nightclubs, shipping companies, they were merely the facade for the empire his grandfather had built and his father had expanded. An empire Alessandro now controlled with ruthless efficiency. And they would target me to get to you? The thought made my stomach turn. It would not be the first time enemies have tried to use personal attachments against me. Something haunted flickered across his face, though they usually have better intelligence. Meaning, Alessandro turned back to me. "Few people knew about us. I kept you separate from that part of my life. Protected. The irony wasn't lost on me. Protected. Yet here I am." His expression darkened. "This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't run." And there it was. The accusation that had been simmering beneath the surface since I'd regained consciousness. I'd tried to flee, and in doing so, had stepped out from under his shield of protection. "I didn't know," I said softly. "I didn't think." "No, you didn't." His voice was sharp. "You didn't think about the consequences, about the danger. You just decided to take my child and disappear." Anger flared through me, hot and sudden. "Your child? Is that all this is about? Your possession? Your heir?" Alessandro moved back to the bed with that fluid grace that had first captivated me, sitting on the edge so close I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something darker, more primal. "You know it's not," he said quietly, dangerously. "You know what you are to me." But I didn't, not really. In the 6 months we'd been together, Alessandro had never defined what we were. He'd pursued me relentlessly after that first night at the restaurant, showering me with attention, drawing me into his orbit until I was spinning helplessly around him. He'd made me his in every way a man could make a woman his, but he'd never once spoken of love. "Tell me then," I challenged, the words escaping before I could reconsider. "What am I to you, Alessandro?" His hand found mine, fingers interlacing with practiced familiarity. "Everything," he said simply, as if it were obvious. "You are everything." It wasn't the declaration I'd been hoping for, but from a man like Alessandro, perhaps it was as close as I would get. A man who had been taught since childhood that emotions were weakness, that vulnerability was death. "Is that why you kept me hidden away?" I asked. "Because I'm so important?" His grip tightened. "I kept you separate to keep you safe. My world is not kind to outsiders." "And now?" Alessandro's thumb traced circles on my palm, the gesture at odds with the intensity in his eyes. "Now everyone will know you are under my protection. Now no one will dare touch what's mine." Before I could respond, a soft knock came at the door. One of Alessandro's men entered, leaning in to whisper something in his ear. I watched Alessandro's expression harden, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "Are you certain?" he asked, receiving a nod in response. "Bene, bring the car around." "I'll be down in 20 minutes. The man disappeared as silently as he'd arrived, leaving us alone again. Alessandro stood, straightening his cuffs with deliberate precision. "You're leaving?" I asked, hating how vulnerable I sounded. "There's business I must attend to." His voice had changed, become colder, more distant. The voice he used when he stepped back into his other role, not my Alessandro, but Alessandro Russo, heir to the Russo crime family. Fear gripped me. "It's about the accident, isn't it? You found something." He didn't deny it. "We may have identified the driver." "Alessandro," I reached for his hand, panic rising in my throat. "Don't do anything." "Anything what?" he asked, voice dangerously soft. "Anything illegal? Anything violent?" He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "The man tried to kill you, tried to kill our child." What would you have me do, Isabella? Call the police? He almost smiled at the absurdity. I don't want you to hurt someone because of me. His laugh was hollow. You still don't understand what you mean to me, do you? His hand cupped my cheek, gentle despite the storm in his eyes. I would tear apart anyone who threatened you, without hesitation or regret. The worst part was, I believed him. I'd seen glimpses of what Alessandro was capable of, the coldness that came over him when his authority was challenged, the quiet menace in his voice when he gave certain orders. I'd chosen to ignore those moments, to pretend they belonged to someone else, not the man who held me with such tenderness in the dark. Please, I whispered. Not even sure what I was begging for. Alessandro's expression softened fractionally. Rest, cara mia, you need your strength. He pressed a kiss to my forehead, lingering there as if memorizing my scent. I'll return before morning. After he left, the room felt emptier, colder despite the carefully regulated temperature. One of his men took up position just inside my door. Alessandro never left me completely unguarded, but his stoic presence only emphasized the absence of his boss. Night fell over Milan, lights twinkling across the cityscape like earthbound stars. I dozed fitfully, dreams punctuated by screeching tires and shattering glass. By Alessandro's voice calling my name from a great distance. I woke sometime after midnight to find a nurse checking my vitals. She smiled reassuringly, adjusting my IV. How are you feeling, Miss Evans? She asked in accented English. Better, I lied. My ribs still ached with each breath, and worry for Alessandro gnawed at me more painfully than any physical injury. That's good. Mr. Russo will be pleased. The casual way she said his name reminded me of how thoroughly Alessandro had taken over this hospital floor. Everyone from the cleaning staff to the head surgeon treated him with a mixture of deference and fear. After she left, I found myself unable to fall back asleep. My hand drifted to my still flat stomach, trying to imagine the life growing inside, a child. Alessandro's child. The thought still didn't seem real. What kind of life could I offer a baby born into this world? A world of luxury and privilege, yes, but also of danger and darkness. A world where its father commanded men capable of violence I couldn't even imagine. But there was another side to Alessandro, one few people ever saw. The man who had spent hours reading poetry to me in Italian, patiently translating each line, who had held me through a night of food poisoning, bathing my forehead with cool cloths, and never once complaining about the mess or the smell, who had taken me to meet his elderly grandmother in her villa by Lake Como, and had looked at me with something like wonder when the formidable old woman had approved of me. These memories twisted in my chest like a knife. This was why I'd run. Not just fear of Alessandro's world, but fear of my own feelings, of how completely I had fallen for a man I should, by all rights, be terrified of. The door opened suddenly, startling me from my thoughts. Alessandro entered, and my heart stuttered at the sight of him. His perfect suit was gone, replaced by a simple black sweater and trousers. There was a darkness in his eyes I'd never seen before, something haunted and hungry at once. You should be sleeping, he said, his voice rougher than usual. I was waiting for you. It wasn't what I'd planned to say, but it was true nonetheless. Alessandro moved to the bed, sitting on the edge with none of his usual grace. Now that he was closer, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his mouth. Did you... I couldn't finish the question. We found him, Alessandro said, confirming my fears. A hired hand, paid to make it look like an accident. His hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing almost painfully. He told us who hired him. I swallowed hard. Who? Vittorio Conti. The name meant nothing to me, but Alessandro spat it like poison. A business associate who thought he could use you to send me a message. The clinical way he described it made me shiver. A message? That I have vulnerabilities. His eyes met mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't name. That I can be hurt through them. And did you... Again, I couldn't finish. Alessandro's smile was cold, nothing like the warm ones he reserved for me in private moments. Conti will never threaten anyone again. I should have been horrified, should have recoiled from the implication in his words. Instead, I felt a treacherous relief knowing the threat was eliminated, knowing Alessandro had ensured our safety in the only way he knew how. Come here, I whispered, shifting painfully to make room beside me on the bed. Alessandro hesitated, then carefully arranged himself next to me. Mindful of my injuries, his arm slid beneath my shoulders, cradling me against his chest, where I could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured into my hair, "when I got that call, when they said you might not make it through surgery. I've never known fear like that." The admission shocked me. Alessandro Russo didn't admit to fear, to weakness of any kind. "I'm still here," I said softly. His hold tightened fractionally. "You tried to leave me." There was no accusation in his voice now, only a raw vulnerability that made my throat tight. "I was scared," I confessed. "Not of you, but of how much I needed you. Of what that meant for me, for my life. And then when I found out about the baby, you thought I wouldn't want it." There was genuine hurt in his voice. "I thought you might see it as an obligation, another possession, not as a miracle." Alessandro finished for me, his voice so low I barely heard it. His hand moved to rest over my stomach, warm and protective. "That's what you are to me, Isabella, you and this child, a miracle I never thought I deserved." The words hung in the air between us, more intimate than any declaration of love. In Alessandro's world, where everything had a price, where loyalty was bought and sold like any commodity, the concept of something undeserved, something given freely without expectation, was perhaps the closest thing to sacred he understood. "Stay with me," he said. And it wasn't a command this time, but a request. "Not because I'm forcing you, not because of the baby. Stay because you choose me, as I've chosen you." I turned my face into his chest, breathing in his scent, feeling the solid strength of him against me. "And if I choose to leave your world behind? If I can't live like this, surrounded by guards, always looking over my shoulder?" Alessandro was quiet for a long moment. "Then I would follow you," he finally said, "even if it meant leaving everything else behind." It was a lie, I knew. Alessandro could no more leave his world than a king could abdicate and expect to live in peace. There would always be enemies, always be threats, always be the specter of his past following us. But in that moment, with his arms around me, and his child growing within me, I allowed myself to believe it could be true. Morning light filtered through the blinds when I woke, casting golden stripes across Alessandro's sleeping form. He looked different in sleep, younger, the hard lines of his face softened, almost innocent if you didn't know the blood on his hands. I studied him, memorizing each detail, the dark sweep of his eyelashes, the slight curl at the ends of his hair, the small scar at the corner of his jaw from some fight he'd never told me about. In sleep, I could almost pretend he was just a man, not a criminal kingpin who controlled half of Milan. My movement must have disturbed him because his eyes opened, instantly alert. Alessandro never woke gradually. It was as if some part of him remained vigilant even in sleep, ready for danger at any moment. "Good morning," I whispered. His lips curved into that rare, genuine smile that still made my heart skip. "Morning, cara mia." He glanced at his watch. "I let you sleep later than usual. How do you feel?" "Better." It wasn't entirely a lie. My body still ached, but the fog of medication had lifted somewhat, leaving my mind clearer than it had been in days. Alessandro propped himself up, studying me with that intense gaze that seemed to catalog every detail. "The doctor will be here at 10 to check on you. If your progress continues, we might be able to move you by the end of the week." "Move me?" I echoed. "To where?" "My house in Lake Como," he said, as if it were already decided. "It's private, secure. You can recover there in peace." I hesitated. His Lake Como property was a fortress disguised as a villa, staffed entirely by his people. Once there, I'd be completely in his world, isolated from everything familiar. "Alessandro, I have my own apartment, my job." "Your apartment isn't secure," he cut me off, his tone hardening. "And you won't be returning to that restaurant." The casual dismissal of my life, modest as it was, sparked a flare of defiance. "You can't just decide that for me." I can, and I have. He sat up fully now, authority settling over him like a cloak. The situation has changed, Isabella. You're carrying my child. Your safety is non-negotiable. And what about what I want? I struggled to sit up, wincing as pain shot through my ribs. What about my choices? Alessandro's jaw tightened, that muscle ticking in his cheek. Your choice nearly got you killed. The accusation stung, partly because there was truth in it. If I hadn't run, if I hadn't been on that dark road alone. That's not fair, I said, voice trembling slightly. Fair? He almost laughed. Nothing about this situation is fair. Nothing about my life has ever been fair. Alessandro ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. I didn't ask to be born into this family, this legacy, but I've done what was necessary to protect what's mine, including you. There was that word again, mine, as if I were another asset in his portfolio, another territory to be defended. I'm not one of your possessions, Alessandro. His eyes darkened. No, you're much more valuable. Before I could respond, a knock came at the door. One of Alessandro's men entered, his expression grim. Scusa, boss. You're needed downstairs. Now. Alessandro stood, immediately transforming into the man his enemies feared. Wait outside. When the door closed, he turned back to me. We'll continue this discussion later. For now, you stay in this room. Paolo will be right outside. What's happening? I asked, alarm rising in my chest. Alessandro hesitated, then sighed. The Conti family is making noise about Vittorio's disappearance. It's nothing to concern yourself with. But I could see it in his eyes. This was serious. Blood called for blood in his world. The cycle of violence never truly ended. It just paused occasionally to gather strength. Be careful, I said, hating how my voice betrayed my fear. Something softened in his expression. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to my forehead. Then my lips, gentle, almost reverent. Always, cara mia. Rest, I'll return soon. After he left, the silence in the room felt oppressive. I lay back against the pillows, hand instinctively moving to my stomach. The baby was barely more than a collection of cells at this point, too small to make its presence known. Yet it had already altered the course of my life irrevocably. I thought of my mother, who'd raised me alone after my father abandoned us when I was 3. She'd worked 2 jobs, scraped together enough for dance lessons because I'd loved ballet, never complained even when exhaustion was etched into every line of her face. She'd died of cancer 2 years before I'd moved to Italy, before I'd met Alessandro. What would she think of the man who'd claimed her daughter and grandchild? Of the world I now found myself trapped in. The hours crawled by. Dr. Moretti came for my examination, pronouncing himself satisfied with my progress. The baby was developing normally, protected by my body despite the trauma of the accident. A miracle, he called it, echoing Alessandro's words from the night before. By afternoon, restlessness had set in. I convinced one of the nurses to help me to the bathroom, then to sit in the chair by the window. Milan sprawled before me, beautiful and oblivious to the power struggles playing out in its shadows. Paolo remained stationed outside my door, his presence a constant reminder that I wasn't truly free to leave. I wondered if I ever would be again. The door opened around 4, but it wasn't Alessandro who entered. Instead, a woman stepped into the room, tall, elegantly dressed in a cream suit, with Alessandro's amber eyes and sharp cheekbones. So you're the famous Isabella, she said, appraising me with a coolness that made me instinctively straighten despite my injuries. I'm Sofia, Alessandro's sister. I'd heard of her, of course. Alessandro rarely spoke of his family, but I knew Sofia ran the legitimate side of the Russo businesses, the restaurants, the import company, the real estate holdings. The public face that allowed the darker operations to remain hidden. He didn't mention you were coming, I said, suddenly conscious of my hospital gown and unwashed hair. Sofia's smile didn't reach her eyes. My brother doesn't tell me everything, nor I him. She moved into the room with the same fluid grace Alessandro possessed, a family trait perhaps. I came as soon as I heard what happened to Vittorio Conti. My heart rate quickened. I don't know anything about that. Of course you don't. She sat in the chair opposite me, crossing her legs. Alessandro would never burden you with such unpleasantness. There was something in her tone, not quite mockery, but close, that raised my defenses. What do you want, Sophia? She studied me for a moment, head tilted slightly. Curious. I see now why my brother is so fascinated by you. You have spirit. I'm not a curiosity to be studied, I snapped. No? Her eyebrow arched. That's exactly what you are to our family, Isabella. An anomaly. Alessandro has never brought a woman into our world before, never risked exposure for someone outside the family. I didn't ask to be brought into your world. Yet here you are. Sophia leaned forward, and now, I hear, carrying the next generation of Russos. The way she said it made my skin crawl, as if my baby were merely a continuation of a dynasty, not a person. What I want, Sophia continued, is to understand what my brother sees in you that's worth upending decades of tradition, worth starting a war with the Conti family. A war? Fear coiled in my stomach. What are you talking about? Sophia's expression revealed nothing. Vittorio Conti wasn't just anyone. He was next in line to lead their family. His death won't go unanswered. I felt suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. Alessandro said it was handled. My brother sees what he wants to see. Sophia stood, smoothing her immaculate suit. He believes his love for you justifies any action, any consequence. He doesn't see that his enemies will use that love against him, against all of us. You think I'm a weakness, I said, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. I think you're a liability, she corrected. One we can't afford right now. What are you suggesting? That I leave? Disappear? My voice rose despite my effort to remain calm. That's exactly what I tried to do. And look what happened. Sophia's expression softened fractionally, the first genuine emotion she'd displayed. I don't want to see my brother destroyed, Isabella. Not even for love. Especially not for love. Before I could respond, the door opened again, and Alessandro himself entered. He stopped short at the sight of his sister, his expression hardening instantly. Sophia, what are you doing here? The siblings stared at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them that I couldn't decipher. Finally, Sophia smiled, once again the polished businesswoman. Just getting to know Isabella. She's lovely, fratello mio. I can see why you're so invested. Alessandro's eyes narrowed. We'll discuss this later. I'm sure we will. Sophia turned to me, inclining her head slightly. Rest well, Isabella. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. After she left, tension radiated from Alessandro in palpable waves. What did she say to you? I hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. She's worried about you, about the consequences of what happened with Conti. Alessandro cursed under his breath. Sophia should mind her own business. This isn't her business, your family, your safety. He moved to the window, looking out at the city with hands clasped behind his back. The Contis have been dealt with. There won't be repercussions. That's not what Sophia thinks. Alessandro turned back to me, his expression unreadable. My sister sees threats everywhere. It's what makes her good at what she does, but in this case, she's wrong. I wasn't sure I believed him. The certainty in Sophia's voice had been too convincing, her concern too genuine beneath her cool exterior. Alessandro, I said carefully, what would happen if I just disappeared? If I went somewhere no one could find me, where no one would associate me with you? His expression darkened instantly. Is that what Sophia suggested? That you leave? No, because it doesn't matter. He closed the distance between us, kneeling beside my chair so our faces were level. There is nowhere you could go that I wouldn't find you. No place far enough. No identity convincing enough. I would turn this world upside down to bring you back to me. The intensity in his eyes should have frightened me. Instead, it sent a treacherous warmth through my veins. Even if staying puts you in danger, I whispered. Alessandro's hand found mine, fingers interlacing. I've been in danger my entire life, Isabella. It's the one constant I can rely on. His other hand moved to my cheek, cradling it with surprising tenderness. But I've never had someone, worth the risk before. The next morning brought rain, droplets sliding down the windows like tears. blurring the Milan skyline into a watercolor of grays and muted colors. I watched them from my bed, tracing their paths with my finger against the cool glass. 1 week had passed since my accident, since Alessandro had found me clinging to life in this hospital. Dr. Moretti had visited earlier, pronouncing me well enough to be discharged tomorrow. Not to my apartment. That option had never truly been on the table, but to Alessandro's Lake Como villa, my gilded cage, albeit one with spectacular views and every luxury imaginable. The door opened, and Alessandro entered, bringing with him the scent of rain and expensive cologne. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of the late nights spent dealing with the fallout from Vittorio Conti's death. Despite Sophia's warnings, there had been no immediate retaliation from the Conti family. Alessandro had assured me they wouldn't dare challenge him directly, but I'd noticed the increase in security around the hospital, the tense whispers among his men. "Good morning," he said, leaning down to press a kiss to my forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Restless." I caught his hand, pulling him to sit beside me. "You look exhausted." A smile ghosted across his lips. "Business matters. Nothing for you to worry about. You always say that. Because it's always true." His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, a habit that never failed to soothe me. "Dr. Moretti tells me you're ready to leave tomorrow. I've made all the arrangements." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The prospect of leaving the hospital should have been welcome, but it felt like stepping from one controlled environment into another. Alessandro studied me, his gaze searching. "You're still uncertain." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Everything's happening so fast. A few months ago, I was just a waitress from Boston trying to build a life in Italy. Now I'm pregnant, recovering from nearly being killed, and about to move in with..." I trailed off, unsure how to define what Alessandro was to me. "With the father of your child," he finished, something hardening in his expression. "With the man who loves you." The declaration hung in the air between us. Alessandro had never said those words before, had never made that explicit commitment. In his world, love was a vulnerability, an admission of weakness that could be exploited. "You love me?" I whispered, hardly daring to believe. His hand tightened around mine. "You doubt it? After everything?" "You've never said it." Alessandro's jaw worked, emotion battling with the restraint that had been bred into him since childhood. "I thought it was understood. I thought I showed you with my actions. My protection." "Protection isn't the same as love," I said gently. He stood abruptly, moving to the window with that restless energy that always seemed to simmer beneath his controlled exterior. "In my world, they are one and the same. Love without protection is meaningless, dangerous." "And protection without love?" Alessandro turned back to me, his amber eyes darkened with intensity. "That's not what this is, and you know it." He returned to my side, taking my face between his hands with surprising gentleness. "I love you, Isabella. I have since the moment you dropped that tray of glasses and cursed in English, thinking no one could understand you. Despite everything," I laughed, remembering that mortifying first encounter. "You never told me you heard that." "I heard everything. Saw everything." His thumb brushed my lower lip, and I wanted everything. The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed me, but instead, it sent warmth spiraling through me. In a life where Alessandro controlled vast criminal enterprises, commanded the loyalty of hundreds of men, his fixation on me, ordinary, unremarkable me, still seemed like something from a dream. "I love you too," I admitted. The truth I'd been running from for months. "That's what terrifies me. Not your world, not the danger, but how completely I've fallen for you. How willing I am to accept things I once thought unforgivable." Alessandro's expression softened, vulnerability showing through the cracks in his armor. "We shape each other, cara mia. You've changed me too, more than you know." A knock at the door interrupted us. One of Alessandro's men entered, his expression grave. "Boss, there's a situation downstairs. Police." Alessandro's demeanor changed instantly, all softness vanishing. "What do they want?" "They're asking about Conti, and..." The man hesitated, glancing at me. "They're asking about Miss Evans. They have questions about her accident." My heart rate spiked, the monitor beside my bed betraying my panic with quickened beeps. Alessandro placed a calming hand on my arm, though his own tension was evident in the set of his shoulders. Tell them Miss Evans is still recovering and cannot be disturbed. Direct them to our lawyer. His voice was ice, brooking no argument. And find out who authorized this visit. The man nodded and withdrew. Alessandro turned back to me, his expression carefully controlled. It's routine, he assured me. The police have to investigate any suspicious accident. But they're connecting it to Conti, I said, fear creeping into my voice. Alessandro, what if they won't find anything? He cut me off. I've insured it. The certainty in his voice should have been comforting, but instead, it reminded me of just how powerful he was, of the resources at his disposal to cover up even murder. I don't want to know the details, do I? I asked quietly. Alessandro studied me for a long moment. No, he finally said. You don't. The honesty in his answer was strangely reassuring. At least he wouldn't lie to me, wouldn't pretend his hands were cleaner than they were. What happens now? I asked. Nothing changes. We leave for Lake Como tomorrow as planned. Alessandro checked his watch. I need to go deal with this. Paolo will stay with you. Alessandro. I caught his hand as he turned to leave. Be careful. Something vulnerable flickered across his face. Always. For you. He leaned down, kissing me with unexpected tenderness. Rest. I'll be back soon. After he left, the room felt emptier, colder. Paolo took up position just inside the door, a silent, watchful presence. I tried to read, to distract myself, but my thoughts kept circling back to the police downstairs, to Sophia's warnings, to the growing feeling that the fragile peace Alessandro had assured me of was about to shatter. Hours passed with no word from Alessandro. Outside, night fell over Milan, the rain intensifying, drumming against the windows. I dozed fitfully, waking at every sound in the corridor. It was past midnight when the door finally opened. I sat up, expecting Alessandro, but instead found Sophia slipping into the room. She dismissed Paolo with a sharp gesture, closing the door behind him. Get dressed, she said without preamble, dropping a bag on the bed beside me. Quickly. We don't have much time. Fear jolted through me. What's happened? Where's Alessandro? Sophia's expression was grim. The police weren't just asking questions. They had a warrant for Alessandro's arrest. Conti's body was found, and there's evidence linking it to Alessandro. That's impossible, I protested. He said he took care of everything. Someone betrayed him. Someone inside our organization. Sophia began pulling clothes from the bag. Jeans, a sweater. Practical items I hadn't worn since entering the hospital. The point is, they took him in for questioning 2 hours ago. My hands trembled as I reached for the clothes. He'll get out though, right? He has lawyers, connections. This isn't just about Conti anymore. Sophia's voice was tight with controlled fear. The anti-Mafia prosecutor has been building a case against our family for years. They're using Conti's murder as leverage to go after everything. Money laundering, extortion, the shipping operations. What does this have to do with me? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Sophia's eyes met mine, hard, but not unkind. You're carrying the Russo heir. If they can't hold Alessandro, they'll use you to get to him. You need to disappear. I can't just leave him, I protested. You can, and you will. Sophia's tone left no room for argument. It's what Alessandro would want. It's why I'm here instead of him. He knew this might happen. Prepared for it. My head spun with the implications. He knew he might be arrested. He knew there was a risk. There's always a risk in our world. Sophia helped me stand, steadying me when pain shot through my still healing body. There's a car waiting. Fake documents. Money. Everything you need to start over somewhere safe. And the baby? I whispered, hand moving protectively to my stomach. Something like envy flashed across Sophia's perfect features. The child will be provided for, protected from a distance. But no one can know it's a Russo, not while this investigation is ongoing. Tears burned behind my eyes. How long? Sophia's expression softened fractionally. I don't know. Months. Years, maybe. Years? The word felt like a physical blow. I can't. Alessandro wouldn't want. What Alessandro wants is for you and his child to be safe. Sophia's hand found mine, surprising me with the gesture of solidarity. He loves you, Isabella, more than I've ever seen him love anything or anyone. Don't make his sacrifice meaningless. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible choice crushing down on me. To stay would be to risk everything. My freedom, my child's safety, Alessandro's focus when he needed it most. To leave would be to tear my heart in two. To walk away from the man I loved when he faced his darkest hour. There's no other way? I asked, a final, desperate hope. Sophia shook her head. Not if you want to keep your child safe. Not if you want Alessandro to fight without distraction. I took a deep breath, feeling something harden within me, a resolve I didn't know I possessed, born perhaps from the knowledge that I now carried a life that depended entirely on my choices. Where will I go? Relief flickered across Sophia's face. Somewhere no one would think to look for the lover of an Italian Mafia heir. She helped me into the sweater, gentle with my healing wounds. Somewhere you can build a new life until it's safe to return. As I dressed, my thoughts turned to Alessandro, proud, powerful Alessandro, in police custody, stripped of his armor of wealth and influence, fighting not just for his freedom now, but for his family's entire empire, for our future. Tell him. I started, then stopped, overwhelmed by everything I wanted to say. I'll tell him you're safe, Sophia promised. The rest can wait until you're together again. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows like nature itself was protesting the separation to come. I finished dressing, each movement a reminder of how far I still was from healed, how vulnerable I would be on my own, but I wouldn't truly be alone, I reminded myself, hand resting on my stomach. I carried a piece of Alessandro with me, the ultimate proof of what we had shared. Whatever came next, however long the separation, that connection could never be severed. I'm ready, I told Sophia, straightening my shoulders despite the pain. Her eyes, so like her brother's, studied me with newfound respect. Perhaps Alessandro chose better than I thought. The small coastal town of Kennebunkport, Maine, had become my sanctuary. Far from the glamour and danger of Milan, I'd built a quiet life here, working remotely as a translator and raising my son away from the shadows of his father's world. Lorenzo Alexander Evans, named for Alessandro's grandfather and carrying my surname for safety, had his father's amber eyes and my dark curls. At 18 months old, he was already showing Alessandro's intensity, his focus when something captured his interest, his stubborn determination. Every day I saw more of his father in him, a bittersweet reminder of what we had lost. Snow fell outside the windows of our small cottage, the December evening drawing in early. I decorated a modest Christmas tree in the corner, more for Lorenzo than myself. The holidays were hardest, times when families should be together, when the absence of Alessandro felt like a physical ache. I had heard nothing directly from him in 2 years. Sophia's occasional encrypted messages were my only connection to my former life. A as well. Case proceeding slowly. Stay hidden. Nothing personal, nothing to trace, nothing to ease the loneliness that had become my constant companion. Lorenzo babbled happily in his playpen, showing me a wooden block with exaggerated pride. I smiled, crossing the room to kneel beside him. That's wonderful, Tesoro, I said, using the Italian endearment without thinking. I tried to keep Italian alive for him, a connection to the heritage that was his birthright, even if he might never claim it. A knock at the door froze me mid-movement. No one knocked on my door here. I kept to myself, friendly but distant with neighbors, careful never to form connections that might lead to questions I couldn't answer. Fear, dormant but never truly gone, surged through me. I scooped Lorenzo into my arms, backing toward the rear door where a car with a full tank of gas was always ready. We had escaped once. I was prepared to do it again if necessary. The knock came again, more insistent. Then a voice, a woman's voice with a familiar Italian accent. Isabella, it's Sophia. Open the door. Relief and fresh anxiety warred within me. Sophia wouldn't come in person unless something significant had happened. Something that couldn't be communicated in a brief encrypted message. I carried Lorenzo to the door, my heart pounding as I peered through the peephole. Sophia stood on my porch, wrapped in an elegant wool coat, snow dusting her dark hair. Alone, as far as I could see. I unlocked the door with trembling fingers. "Sophia? What's happened? Is Alessandro—" "He's fine," she interrupted, stepping inside and quickly closing the door behind her. Her eyes immediately went to Lorenzo, widening slightly. "So this is my nephew." Lorenzo regarded her with solemn curiosity, his head tilting in a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my chest ached. "Why are you here?" I asked, unable to keep the fear from my voice. Sophia removed her gloves, her movements precise and deliberate as always. "The case against Alessandro has been resolved." "Resolved?" I repeated, hardly daring to hope. "What does that mean?" "It means the primary witnesses against him have recanted their testimony. The prosecutor has dropped the most serious charges. What remains is manageable." I sat heavily on the nearest chair, clutching Lorenzo closer. "How? After 2 years, suddenly it's over?" Sophia's smile was thin, knowing. "Let's just say Alessandro found leverage that was more persuasive than what the prosecutors offered their witnesses. I didn't ask for details. Some things were better left in that shadowy world I'd fled. So he's free?" My voice cracked on the word. "Conditionally. There are still legal proceedings, but he's no longer in detention." Sophia approached cautiously, her eyes never leaving Lorenzo. "May I?" I hesitated, then nodded. Sophia reached out, gently touching Lorenzo's cheek. Something that might have been tenderness flickered across her usually impassive features. "He has Alessandro's eyes," she said softly, "and his temper," I added with a small smile. Lorenzo, suddenly shy, buried his face against my neck. Sophia stepped back, resuming her businesslike demeanor. "Alessandro doesn't know I'm here," she said. "He believes you're still in Quebec, where you were initially relocated." The revelation stung. "You've been tracking me." "Of course." Sophia looked almost offended. "Did you think we would simply let you disappear? That Alessandro would allow his son to go unprotected?" I glanced toward the window, suddenly aware of implications I'd missed. "There have been people watching us all this time?" "From a distance. Discreetly." Sophia removed a small envelope from her coat pocket. "Which is why I know you've been safe, that you've created a good life here, that perhaps—" She hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain, "that perhaps you no longer wish to return." The suggestion was like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you have a choice, Isabella." Sophia placed the envelope on the small table between us. "Inside are 2 first-class tickets to Milan departing tomorrow. Alessandro will be waiting if you choose to come." "If?" I echoed, disbelieving. "You think I'd choose to stay away? That I've been hiding here by choice?" Sophia's gaze was steady, assessing. 2 years is a long time. People change. Lives are rebuilt. The woman who fled Milan was in love with my brother, yes. But that woman hadn't yet raised his child alone, hadn't built a life independent of his influence and protection. I wouldn't blame you if you'd found freedom preferable to the constraints of our world. I looked down at Lorenzo, at his perfect, innocent face. At the son who had never known his father except through the stories I told him before sleep, the Italian lullabies I sang that Alessandro had once sung to me. "I never wanted freedom from Alessandro," I said quietly. "Only safety for his child." Something like respect flickered in Sophia's eyes. "Then pack what you need. A car will come for you at 9 tomorrow morning." She turned to leave, but I called after her. "Sophia, why did you come yourself? Why not send someone else?" She paused at the door, her back to me. "Because I needed to see for myself what kind of mother my nephew had. What kind of woman had brought my brother to his knees." She glanced back, her expression softening fractionally. "I needed to know if you were worthy of the devotion Alessandro has shown you, even from behind bars." "And?" I couldn't help asking. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Let's just say I'm less opposed to your return than I once was." After she left, I stood frozen in place, Lorenzo squirming in my arms. The envelope sat on the table, those plane tickets representing everything I'd dreamed of for 2 years. A return to Alessandro, a chance for my son to know his father. But also a return to danger, to a world of shadows and violence that had nearly killed me once before. I put Lorenzo in his crib for a nap, then began methodically packing our essential belongings. Clothes, documents, the few mementos I'd collected of our time here. With each item I placed in the suitcase, my resolve strengthened. Whatever awaited us in Milan, whatever Alessandro had become in these 2 years of fighting for his freedom, his empire, it was where we belonged. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the snow glistening like diamonds in the early light. I dressed Lorenzo in his warmest clothes, packed the last of our things, and waited by the window, watching for the car Sophia had promised. It arrived precisely at 9, a black SUV with tinted windows. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, loaded our luggage efficiently while I secured Lorenzo in his car seat. "Miss Evans," the driver said with a respectful nod, "we'll be taking you directly to the private airfield. The jet is ready whenever you are." Private jet. Of course. I was returning to Alessandro's world now, where commercial flights were for ordinary people with ordinary lives. As we drove away from the cottage that had been our sanctuary, I felt a curious mixture of grief and anticipation. This quiet life had given me time to grow stronger, to become a mother worthy of Lorenzo, to find parts of myself I hadn't known existed. But it had never been complete, never been where I truly belonged. The flight to Milan passed in a blur of anxiety and hope. Lorenzo, fascinated by his first time in the air, was remarkably well behaved, charming the flight attendants with his babbling mixture of English and Italian words. Night had fallen over Milan when we finally landed. Another black car waited on the tarmac, its driver opening the door as we descended the steps from the plane. And there he stood, Alessandro. 2 years had changed him. His face was leaner, harder, new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. His hair was longer than he'd worn it before, curling slightly at the nape of his neck, but his eyes, those amber eyes that Lorenzo had inherited, were exactly as I remembered, burning with an intensity that made my breath catch. For a moment, we simply stared at each other across the distance. Then Lorenzo, spotting the unfamiliar man, pointed and said clearly, "Papa?" I froze. I had shown Lorenzo photos of Alessandro, told him stories, but had never expected him to recognize his father immediately. Alessandro's expression cracked, naked emotion washing over his face. He moved toward us slowly, as if afraid we might vanish if he approached too quickly. "Yes," I whispered to Lorenzo. "That's your papa." When Alessandro reached us, he didn't touch me first as I had expected. Instead, with reverent hands, he reached for his son. Lorenzo, normally shy with strangers, went to him without hesitation, as if some primal recognition passed between them. Alessandro held his son for the first time, his eyes closing briefly as if in prayer. When he opened them again, they shone with unshed tears. "He is perfect," he said, his voice rougher than I remembered. "Mio figlio," my son. Only then did his eyes meet mine again. "Isabella." My name on his lips sounded like coming home. "Alessandro," I whispered, suddenly uncertain. 2 years stretched between us like an ocean. What if we had grown too far apart? What if the connection we'd once shared had been severed by time and distance? He must have read the doubt in my face because he shifted Lorenzo to one arm and reached for me with the other, pulling me against him with gentle insistence. His familiar scent, sandalwood and something uniquely him, enveloped me, breaking down the last of my reserves. "Never again," he murmured against my hair. "I will never let you go again." I pulled back slightly to look at his face, to search for changes, for signs of what these 2 years had cost him. "Your case," Sophia said, "it's not completely resolved." "It's enough," he said firmly. "Enough that I can promise you and Lorenzo safety. A future." "In your world?" I asked, needing to be certain. A shadow crossed his face. "My world has evolved. Some businesses have been set aside. Others expanded. I made choices, Isabella, choices that would give us a chance. Understanding dawned. You've gone legitimate. As much as possible. His lips quirked in a hint of his old smile. Rome wasn't built in a day, cara mia, but I've laid the foundation for something we can build together. Something Lorenzo can inherit without shame. The implications of what he was saying, of the sacrifices he must have made, the power he must have relinquished, overwhelmed me. Alessandro Russo, giving up parts of his empire for love. Why? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. He looked at our son, then back to me, his expression more open, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. Because you were right to run, right to fear what my world would do to you, to him, and I would rather build a new world than lose you again. Lorenzo, growing restless, reached one small hand to touch his father's face, babbling something in his mixed language. Alessandro caught the tiny fingers, pressing a kiss to them with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to my eyes. Come, he said, leading us toward the waiting car. Let's go home. As we drove through the glittering Milan night, Lorenzo fell asleep against Alessandro's chest. I watched them together, father and son, the missing piece of our family finally restored. Whatever came next, whatever remnants of Alessandro's past still needed resolving, whatever challenges awaited us, we would face them together. Not as the vulnerable girl and the powerful Mafia boss who had first met in that restaurant 2.5 years ago, but as equals who had each sacrificed, each suffered, each grown stronger in our time apart. I love you, Alessandro said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. More now than before, if that's possible. I laid my head on his shoulder, feeling for the first time in years that I was exactly where I belonged. I love you too, I whispered. Enough to start over. Enough to try again. His arm tightened around me, and I knew that whatever world Alessandro had built for us, whatever compromises he had made between his past and our future, it was one where we could finally, truly be a family.